Hey, so in this video we're going to be looking at every single character in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and go into any point from their present all the way to their past, as far as weird little details you didn't know about the character, or weird little details that are not accurate to the character. None of it's meant to criticize, it's all just meant for fun. And to start with, let's go with Mario. So, with Mario, there was a point in time where he was ultra detailed. His denim was really detailed, but during this time, the bottoms of his shoes had grips on them. For Super Smash Bros. Melee and Super Smash Bros. Brawl, those grips were a character detail that was never used outside of these two games. Whether you look to something like the silicone renders of Mario for Mario 64, or you go to games of its current time like Super Mario Sunshine, none of these games had grips on the bottoms of Mario's shoes.
Donkey Kong.
Next up is Donkey Kong, and in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, this is the only model of Donkey Kong in existence that has interpreted the black areas around Donkey Kong's eyes as more fur. In Melee and other versions of Super Smash Bros., it's left to be ambiguously dark. It doesn't really have any clear indication of what it's actually supposed to be, and as far as I know, this is the only time that Nintendo's ever done this. Next up is Link, and I'll give you a 2-for-1 deal on this one. If you want to just go for a detail that you should have been able to notice on your own, the model for the Melee version of Link is a perfect representation of Ocarina of Time Link. And by that I mean there are details to this character model that you would only notice if you looked at the promotional art for Ocarina of Time at the time. Like, for example, these bandages here that are wrapped around the sheath of Link's sword. This is something that was not even on the original N64 model of Link, but like I said, any of the art that you looked at, if you paid close attention, it was there. The other is a boundary break. Sorry, we couldn't avoid it, but in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, inside of Link's cap is a full head of hair. Now, we can only speculate for the reason as to why, but it is my guess that one of the alternate costumes here was the outfit from Skyward Sword, and in Skyward Sword, this particular outfit did not have a hat. So it could have just been that this was supposed to be a hatless version of Link that the developers turned against in favor of an accurate hitbox. Samus in Super Smash Bros. Brawl has a very uncommon suit. It is the Varia suit from Metroid Zero Mission. The way that you can figure this out is due to the patterns on the shoulders not being dimples like they are in Metroid Prime, and the line patterns match that of Zero Mission. But the key giveaway is the green lights on her red chest plate, which is not in Super Metroid, and it is not on the SAX in Metroid Fusion. Now, most of the official artwork for Zero Mission has her in her power suit, not the Varia suit, and ending scenes only give you a look at her in her gravity suit, but when you look at how the gravity suit looks, and you just imagine what that looks like with the Varia suit, it's easy to figure out that this was meant to be for the Zero Mission, on top of the fact that the gimmick of Samus in this game was the fact that she turns into Zero Suit Samus, if that wasn't already the dead giveaway. But before we move on to the next character, I want to talk about today's sponsor, FlexiSpot. FlexiSpot was nice enough to send me over a chair to improve my day-to-day work life. My old chair, it was very rigid, stiff, and upright, and there's no adjustment that you can make whatsoever. But with FlexiSpot, you are just allowed to make all sorts of modulations to make it the most comfortable experience that you could possibly ask for. The headrest is completely adjustable, so now it contours completely to my neck. Although you can lock this so you don't have to accidentally lean back, you can lean back and you sort of guide the chair and it does the rest of the work. You can stop wherever you want, and you pretty much can comfortably lean in any sort of angle you want. Or if you're sitting upright, feel free to go crisscross style. You got the leg room for it. Also has lumbar support, so your back is well taken care of and you can adjust that any way you see fit. I think the coolest thing that I was not expecting from this chair is the armrests. The armrests are fully modulable. Not only can you adjust the height of them like you're seeing here, but you can also just kind of spin them around. And this actually helped me out quite a great deal. My body likes to face the monitors in one angle, and my arm likes to use the mouse from a completely separate angle. I absolutely love this chair, and for sitting 12 hours a day working non-stop, I don't walk away from my workstation with a sore back or a sore bottom. It has happened, but it hasn't happened here. And that has everything to do with the latex seat cushion, which has memory foam in it. Really good stuff. All these chairs come with a 30-day return policy with a risk-free trial. If you don't like it, send it back. Also, when you buy it, it has a 10-year warranty. If you got any damaged parts, it's under the warranty. Get it replaced. And if you use my code C730, you can get $30 off in the description. I only showed you one of the chairs, but they also have the C5 chair and the C7 Morpher. The C5 chair is good on a budget, and the C7 is for if you want to upgrade. Oh, and it's Black Friday at FlexiSpot. Enjoy up to 60% off site-wide on top of your $30 off. It's the biggest savings of the year. Grab yours now. Thank you, FlexiSpot, and now back to the show.
Dark Samus.
For Dark Samus, if you move while shooting a shooting item, you'll hear footsteps despite the fact that she's a floating character. Seems to be just a little bit of a weird oversight. For Yoshi in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, it is the first and only time he has grips underneath his shoes, but also he has some weird things going on with his osteoderms, often called the plates on a Stegosaurus. Yoshi's plates have a lot of realism to them. This would get adjusted in Smash Wii U onward. Kirby's a little interesting because he has these rosy cheeks that are in every single version of Super Smash Bros. Now, the only deviation from that is whenever he gets hit in Melee onward, where his cheeks sort of get lines on them or next to his eyes. However, the character select screen for Super Smash Bros. 64 depicts Kirby with the lines for his cheeks, giving him more of that classic look, but he doesn't get that on the character model itself. For Fox McCloud, one of the weirdest things is that in Super Smash Bros. Melee, he didn't have an English voice actor. Instead, they had the Japanese voice actors try to speak English. And if anyone was like me back in the day, I thought they were still speaking Japanese. Mission complete! But if you switch over to the Japanese setting, more phrases come out of Fox and Falco. For example, when Fox does his taunt, he has two different phrases instead of just the one when you have English. Come on! Kakatte koi! As well as the victory screens having a bunch of different dialogue as well. So Pikachu has gone through many changes, but the latest change for Pikachu comes down to the lore of the Pokemon that the electricity that Pikachu stores is inside of its cheeks. And although the past games have explicitly stated this, and also sort of alluded to it with how the attacks are formed, it is not until Super Smash Bros. Ultimate that finally this little fact about Pikachu is in full display with its cheeks lighting up every time it does an attack. Luigi is one of the most bizarre characters. As many people know, he's pretty much a character of his own in Super Smash Bros. And by that I mean he doesn't really exude any of the Luigi-like qualities in most of the games that he's in for the Super Smash Bros. Series. This includes the very first game that he appeared in, Super Smash Bros. 64, where the character seemed to be really awkward. I think the intention here was that he was trying to imitate Mario's moves, but with a lack of confidence. And so there's just all sorts of stuff here that really didn't resemble the Luigi that we knew back then. In fact, it's hard to say whether or not Smash Bros. 64 Luigi influenced Luigi's Mansion Luigi because of the fact that his personality took a huge departure in that game as well. One of the really cool things about Ness is that starting with Super Smash Bros. Melee onward, there was a little badge on the back of his backpack, and although you may think that this is a Smash Bros. Edition, this is actually a really dedicated detail to the character because the clay sculpture that was used in Mother 2 promotional material actually did have a little badge on the back of his backpack. A lot of people don't know this because the sculpt is usually shown from the front, but the sculpt was also recreated for figurines down the road, and you can see that same exact badge right there on anything that you can find on eBay. Also, one annoying lack of attention to detail is that they don't use the peace sign at any point in any of the Smash Bros. Games, despite the fact that this is a very iconic pose for Ness in Mother 2 or Earthbound. Now, you might think that this is due to cultural differences, but in Super Smash Bros. 64, Mario throws out that hand gesture in official artwork. And you might think, well, they changed their mind in Super Smash Bros. Melee. However, that hand gesture was sanctioned by Yoshi in the trophy section. But especially with cultural awareness starting to rise during the time of Super Smash Bros. Brawl, you might think that it happened then. However, the hand gesture was sanctioned by Luigi in his taunt. By the time of Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, a lot of adjustments were starting to happen for characters. However, Ness's fuzzy pickle pose does not show up in the taunts and not in the victory screens either, instead handing that off to Pit. And Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was probably the absolute best time to introduce this taunt or victory screen because of the fact that a lot of characters got adjusted to be more accurate to their actual game selves. However, Ness still did not get this pose, and instead it was handed off to Daisy in her side taunt. For Captain Falcon, of course I have to say this, fans of Boundary Break will obviously know this already, but in case you're new here, Captain Falcon in Super Smash Bros. Brawl has an eyeball. Take a camera inside of his visor, you can see that one of his eyes is actually visible, and that eyeball that's used is the exact same eyeball that was used on Solid Snake. For Jigglypuff, there's this weird quirk about her that if you hold your shield up for too long, she just skyrockets into the sky and dies immediately. This actually started all the way back on the Nintendo 64, and my guess as to why is maybe the fact that she's a balloon-type Pokemon, and this is supposed to be a gag about a balloon popping. But yes, this persevered all the way to Smash Ultimate, and because she dies instantaneously, it's really hard to see her stun animation. However, she has one just like any other character, and with every single Smash Brothers game, there's a different expression on her face depending on which game you play. Princess Peach is a bit strange. If you look at her finger, you can see that she has a ring. This ring has existed all the way back since Super Smash Bros. Melee, all the way into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. But why even talk about this ring at all? It's because this ring doesn't exist anywhere in any other media other than Super Smash Bros. This is her ring in this game franchise only. The closest instance this ever came to not being a truth is in Super Mario Sunshine. However, the ring on her finger in this one is not only on a different hand, but it's also a different color entirely, being red. For Princess Daisy, if you look really close on her dress, you can see that there are little daisy patterns all over, like for example on these gloves here, as well as on these trimmings, as well as here on the corset. One little technical error that I should mention too is that for the forward air move, despite the fact that they didn't have this error on Princess Peach, you can see that the shadow for the crown remains on the top of Daisy's head. For Bowser in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, there's this really weird glitch that if you get the Smash Ball and you do a double jump backwards, you'll see the Smash Ball eyes for Bowser placed on top of his head instead of on top of his eyes. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, if you select Nana as your player-controlled character for the Ice Climbers, you can see that Nana's model in the off-camera version is still using Popo's model, obviously evidenced by what the hairstyle on the model is. For Sheik, she got a redesign in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and that design looks very similar to a Twilight Princess type style character. That's not a coincidence. It was admitted during the character's reveal in the Smash Dojo website, which is officially released by Nintendo, that the character's design was taken straight out of the design documents of Twilight Princess. Though the model is never used in Twilight Princess, it was drafted earlier in development. Now, Princess Zelda is a very interesting character because she's gone through a lot of aesthetic changes over the years and over the different games, but between Super Smash Bros. Brawl and Smash Bros. For Wii U, both versions are supposed to use the Twilight Princess version of Princess Zelda, and the Brawl version of Princess Zelda seems to be an extraction of the exact same model from Twilight Princess, so there's not going to be any inconsistencies there. However, the model that was used for Super Smash Bros. For Wii U was made entirely from scratch, and so although there is a serious amount of attention to detail in terms of getting all the decals right on her dress and gloves and everything, the one tiny detail that I noticed that was different between the two models is that the Triforce that's on the hairband on the back of her head that holds together her braid seems to be missing in the Wii U version. There might be other little tiny details, but from what I was able to glean, this seems to be the only one. For Dr. Mario, he was first introduced in Melee, and if you look behind his lab coat, you can see that he has just a plain white shirt underneath. This is somewhat accurate to how he looked in his very first game, Dr. Mario on the NES, where promotional material doesn't really show him with a tie or a dress shirt underneath. However, that was something that changed later on, and he did get a red tie with a dress shirt, and that was represented when he first got reintroduced in Smash Wii U. However, the black pants that you see in every single version that Dr. Mario exists in is a construct of Super Smash Bros. Alone, as he's never worn black pants in any of the Dr. Mario games. For Pichu, you'd think there'd be very little to change about the character model, but all the way back in Super Smash Bros. Melee, the ears were never quite right. You could see the pattern on the yellow on the inside of the ears here has a very different shape from how it looks in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate seemed to have gotten a more accurate version of how Pichu's ears are supposed to look, even as far back as his first appearance with official art. The shape of the ears and the accuracy of the pattern is a lot more in line with what you're supposed to see with Pichu, and also the back of the ears are different between the two versions as well. For Melee, they just sort of made the texture of the yellow tuft connected to the ear itself, whereas in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, they went through the trouble of actually making the yellow tuft layer over the ears. So for Falco, there's been many changes to the character model over the years, and You would think that the character model from Wii U to Smash Ultimate would be relatively the same, but it's not. In fact, the model is more based on the Star Fox Zero design, even though it still doesn't get a lot of things right. There's a lot of details to the Star Fox Zero outfit that gets exaggerated here in Smash, but one thing that I was really shocked to see, especially because it doesn't really seem like players would be able to notice this detail even if they wanted to see it, is that if you go all the way to the zipper on Falco, especially for the Star Fox Zero design, you can see the Star Fox logo on his zipper. And in Smash Ultimate, that is also the case. I thought I vaguely saw it in-game, but I was not satisfied with the footage. So instead I had to download the model off of Models Resource and look at it here in Blender. And yeah, if you take the camera really close up to the zipper, you can see that they included that very, very tiny detail that most players would miss. Marth is a very interesting character because in many of the Smash Brothers games, he gets special colors that are supposed to represent certain time periods in which his game's released. But Super Smash Bros. Brawl is the one and only time where there's technically a costume change. Rather than strict to strictly a palette swap, the outfit to the light blue Marth has a very subtle change to the bottom of his tunic. Rather than that ornate gold trimming going all around the edges of the tunic like any other version of Marth, it stops at the vertical part of the design and begins a plain blue stitching along the horizontal side. The ornate pattern on the blue tunic itself is also gone, and this is all in the interest of trying to make him look more accurate to his most recent release at the time, which was a remake of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon on the DS. This can be confirmed by the very light blue cape, as well as the gold metal on his boots as opposed to steel. For Lucina in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, there's a tear in her character model. When she's doing one of her jumps, it's very obvious there's a giant hole in the middle of her stomach. Moving the camera around can really give you an idea of this because of all the different objects that you can see through her at this point. For young Link, when he drinks the milk, there is writing on that milk bottle, and that writing is in Hylian. The Hylian language is able to be deciphered. Now the deciphering goes into the Japanese language, and so if we decipher it into Japanese and then translate that to English, the big font says Lon Lon Milk, and the tiny font, which was a little difficult to decipher, said health is number one, aka something like good for your health, or a healthy choice. A lot of people have wondered why Ganondorf even has a sword at all in Super Smash Bros. Melee. He doesn't use it in combat, it only shows up in a victory screen, and he doesn't even have one in Ocarina of Time. Well, the reason why they included a sword and didn't put a lot of thought into how it would affect players' feelings is because there was a sword in the Space World 2000 demo where Ganondorf is fighting Link, and that model that is used to fight Link is almost the exact same model that is used in that demo. With this higher quality footage that was founded by Hard for Games, it's incredibly easy now to see that there are a lot of details to the model itself, as well as the texture work, which is pretty much used polygon to polygon, pixel to pixel on this model. Now, there are some things that are a little bit different from the Space World demo, and it does seem that the texture sheet was sort of done over to make it more Melee-esque, but ultimately, a lot of the details that were in the original model are still present here, which makes me believe that it wasn't completely done from scratch. So Mewtwo is kind of interesting, both in Smash 4 and Melee. He had original dialogue that was acted out in Japanese, but never in English. In fact, you can listen to these phrases by switching the language over to Japanese in your American version of Melee. Some of the phrases are, which somewhat translates to the outcome in which I lose can't happen, and orokana, which means fool, and then there's also which can translate to, why do I exist? Mewtwo's dialogue went hard. I wish we got this dialogue in the game. Roy's an interesting case, because behind the scenes, he has something weird going on with his texture sheet, with the hilt of the binding blade having a HAL Laboratory copyright mark on it for some reason, and HAL Laboratory is also misspelled. But in-game, there's also some really cool stuff, of course, the first of which being that if you weren't paying attention, you may have never even noticed the fact that the sheath to his sword doesn't exist in actual gameplay. It does exist. It exists whenever you're in the victory screen or whenever Roy loses. And in fact, when Roy does lose, the sword is inside the sheath and it's just wigging out. Here's a good look at what the sword's doing, because I know that in standard definition and with that tiny little box, you can't see it as well as you could right here. Being one of the brand new characters, there isn't a whole lot to say about Chrom, but if you wanted to really seriously nitpick something down to the finest detail, there's one thing that is slightly off about his character design, and that is that there's supposed to be a symbol on the sheath of his sword, as indicated by this one piece of promotional artwork, and I don't seem to see it anywhere on the character model, so that is the one interesting fact that I have for Chrom.
Watch.
Mr. Game & Watch by nature is the weirdest one of all, and of course, when you look at his character model, you see the fact that he's 2D like his monochromatic games. But did you know that his actual 3D model is 3D? I just kind of spoiled it there, but the point is that yes, his Z-axis is set to 0.1, which makes him incredibly flat, which means that there is a 3D model hidden underneath here. Now, there are hints of this when you see things like Bowser doing his down throw and things like that, because he breaks out of his very, very low frame rate into 60 FPS. Also, whenever Mr. Game & Watch picks up a metal box, you can see the 3D depth to his character, even though he's still technically flat. So that's how you can see it for yourself, but with a little bit of adjustment to the code, we can make Mr. Game & Watch full 3D, and if we give him the metal box, we can see all the dimensions to him. There's all sorts of fun little facts you can glean from this too, like most of the items that he uses in his moveset are actually 2D and not 3D models. But you can also see what parts of his moveset are 3D models, like the frying pan here, or his helmet. One of the coolest things of all about making him 3D is that we can see how his legs are positioned, even though again, he's supposed to just be a flat 2D model with no depth whatsoever. Meta Knight has one interesting fact about him, which is that in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, when you do a perfect shield, it's the only time his eye color changes. So here, his eyes turn red, as well as an off color that's in the center of the eye, something that's not in the original eyes. While his eyes have turned red in certain games, it doesn't feel like this is a direct reference to anything in particular. Part of me just feels like they just need a different color for when he does the perfect shield, since his eyes are already yellow. But it could be a couple of things. It could be a reference to the show, it could be a reference to certain games in the franchise, but I'll let you be the judge of that. For Pit, this is probably a commonly well-known one, but still, it's really funny and interesting. When you pick up either of the hammers from Super Smash Bros. Brawl, he swings it like he does on Kid Icarus, the NES game. Now, while some of the other characters may have individualized swinging animations, the hammer itself usually moves about the same. But like I said, for Pit, it is a classic throwback to the 1986 game. Next up is Dark Pit. There's another model error to this character as well. In Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, if you look at the ears of Dark Pit, you can see that there's giant holes in the model. So occasionally, at certain angles, you can see the background through Dark Pit's head. For Zero Suit Samus, I was going to talk about the weird boots that they had to add to Super Smash Bros. For Wii U onward, just so that she could have a different moveset, but instead, I want to talk about an even weirder little trivia fact about her, that if you select her in the tournament mode for Super Smash Bros. Brawl, her name is misspelled as Zero Suit Samus. Wario's WarioWare model is really interesting. First of all, there's a tiny detail on his buttons that says Made in W, which is really easy to miss, as well as a hawk that is on his belt buckle. But one of the coolest things about Brawl version of WarioWare Wario is that he has eyes on his goggles. It seems to be like some sort of gag of some kind. This was removed in every other version of Wario that's been Super Smash Bros. Since. But one thing that they added to Super Smash Bros. Wii U to Smash Ultimate is that for some reason they added a wood grain texture to the bottom of Wario's shoes, and for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate in particular, they make it very clear that whatever is going on with Wario's shoes, it's like a slip-on fabric that has wood on the bottom. Interestingly enough though, if you move over to the classic Wario costume, he does not have that wood grain texture. It's a different material entirely. For Solid Snake, he uses explosives that are remote detonated, but sometimes it'll be a butterfly. The reason why it's a butterfly is a reference to Metal Gear Solid 3 at a certain point in the game where Big Boss molds the explosive to look like a butterfly. With classic Ike, there is something going on with his design. With the Super Smash Bros. Brawl version, he has a pattern on his bandana that seems to look like this, and also the design on the back of his cape is closer to his neck and shoulders. However, in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, that design on the cape is all the way down here, and the design on his bandana seems to have been altered. It seems to be like an approximation of what it was in Brawl, but it's not quite the same. And what's funny is that the pattern from Brawl is also just an approximation of what the official art is. So Super Smash Bros. Ultimate ends up being an approximation of an approximation. Also, that sigil on the back of the cape seems to be a Super Smash Bros. Construct, as there doesn't seem to be any sigil in any of the official artwork of Ike in Path of Radius. For Pokemon Trainer in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, if there is a no contest or there is a team win of 3 members or more, the Pokemon Trainer is the only person that appears on screen. There is no Pokemon that seems to join them in the victory or the no contest. But weirdly, as what it seems to be a glitch, if you win as Ivysaur, you get the final kill or the most amount of kills, you'll still hear Ivysaur despite the fact that Ivysaur is not in the victory screen.
Way to go, Ivysaur!
I don't know many characters that have teeth at will. Diddy Kong will be an example here of what I'm talking about. The character model in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, at least, never ever has teeth, not even inside the lips, unless you do this taunt, and then all of a sudden he grits some pearly whites. And again, most characters, it'll be that the teeth will exist underneath the lips, but in the case of Diddy Kong, no. Once he's done with that taunt, you can't find those teeth anywhere. For Lucas, there's a victory animation where he pulls a needle out of the ground. This is a reference, of course, to Mother 3, like many other things in his moveset. But one of the cool things about it is that there's a unique model for the needle. And in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, if you move the camera up and above the victory screen, you can see that the needle is just hanging out in midair, which gives us a great look of the model up close to soak in all of the detail that it has. For Sonic the Hedgehog, anytime he's in a ball form or spinning, you can take the camera inside of that ball and see that he has his eyebrows as well as his mouth. But what he doesn't have is his nose or actual eyeballs. If he's spinning, the actual face spins as well. For King Dedede, there's a special quirk about him. Pick the Dreamland 64 stage and play him on the stage. He will not show up in the background, which is something that would normally have happened all the way back on the Nintendo 64. Though, interestingly enough, if you were to go to training mode and select Dreamland and then pick King Dedede there, he will still appear in the background. For Olimar and Brawl, they added a whole bunch of extra details to his suit that wasn't in his original games. In the original Pikmin games, he had a very, very minimalistic design. So to soup him up, they gave him all sorts of extra little doodads and things like that on his backpack, and also buttons and stuff like that on his front. But the coolest thing is that his arms are patches that have his company logo on it, the Hakotate. It even says Hakotate on it. Though, interestingly, on his right arm, the Hakotate patch is reversed, so the lettering is also just mirrored, which ends up being a texturing error. Next up is Lucario, and in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, he has a final smash, that being the giant Aura Blast. And if you take the camera and pan it out, you can see that there is an end to this beam. It's just really, really, really long, and no stage would ever be big enough to contain it. For Rob the Robot, there is a distinction between the Japanese Rob and the American Rob. The Japanese Rob is red with sort of like a creamy white, and the US Rob is a combination of 2 different tones of gray. But to make a crazy distinction between the two, there is a sticker on the front of the Rob that is different between the 2 regions. And Sakurai and team went the extra mile and actually included the correct US sticker for the US color composition of Rob. Now, there's a couple of weird things about Toon Link's model that we'll talk about here. A lot of this applies to every single appearance that he's had in Super Smash Bros., but one that's particular to Super Smash Bros. Brawl is that the inside of his shield has a weird pattern to it that doesn't exist in the original Wind Waker. The original Wind Waker's wooden planks on the inside of the shield are just normal. There's anything spectacular about them, but the one in Super Smash Bros. Brawl seems to have some ornate sort of appearance that is stained into the wood for some reason. It could just be a texturing error that makes it look that way, but it is something that stands out. Another thing that is just flat out wrong is that the Master Sword is supposed to have this little design here right above the handle, but in every single version of Super Smash Bros., he doesn't have this design on it, which is a little bit strange because the character in itself is very minimalistic in design, so any details that are added to this model or his weaponry, it should be in the interest of developers to replicate. And the last few things may not be classified as errors, but they're still worth noting that Link shouldn't have this shield in particular at this point in time since he has the fully reawakened Master Sword. By the time he has the fully reawakened Master Sword, he should have the mirror shield at this point. But I do get it from the designers at Super Smash Bros. That the original shield for Toon Link is a little more iconic. And also, ironically, for the fact that he is called Toon Link, he never has toon shading in any of the Smash Bros. Games. And on top of that, one of his most iconic features to the character model, which is that his eyebrows and eyes have layer priority over his hair, is something that the developers chose not to do. Now, I do believe that this was a decision made on their part simply because you do see this effect used on things like the trophies in Super Smash Bros. 4. For Wolf, in his first appearance in Super Smash Bros., he had two eyes. If you take the camera inside of his, futuristic eye patch, I guess it was in this case, he had an eye underneath his eye patch. However, they fixed this for every single other version of Super Smash Bros. That Wolf has been in, which is just ultimate. For the villager in Smash for Wii U, if you look at the background, you can see that any of the villagers that are back there, except for one villager, all wear the costumes of the characters that you can select from in the character select screen for the villager. Here's one of the two inspirations for this entire video, Mega Man. I always wanted to talk about this. So Super Smash Bros. Goes for exceptional accuracy in terms of recreating the NES sprite of Mega Man for his appearance in Super Smash Bros. This design decision was a little divisive amongst fans. I personally love it, but one of the things I've always found a bit odd is that Mega Man in Super Smash Bros. Just never blinks. And yet, in his NES games, he does. It's really funny that in every single Mega Man NES game, he blinks, so it's a part of this design that Super Smash Bros. Is supposed to be copying from, and yet Mega Man, amongst so few in the roster, just never blinks at all. Did you notice that the Wii Fit trainer is one of the only characters in the entire character select screen that has lowercase letters in her name? Only sharing this little bit of trivia with the Miis, and the reason for this is that the Wii is supposed to represent two people coming together. That's what the two lowercase i's are supposed to mean. So for that, the developers decided to make Wii Fit lowercase with only proper punctuation. For Rosalina and Luma in the Super Smash Bros. For Wii U version, if you were able to pull out Polari and Polari gets hit by something, Polari's eyes have a weird effect. Some people have described this as his eyes tearing up, but for it to just be a black line that sort of goes across the bottom, it looks more like it's just some sort of technical error. Probably has something to do with the fact that Polari's eyes are the only ones out of the group that is blue instead of black. And so this effect is probably on all of the Luma, but this is the only one where it's visible. This difference is not present in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Little Mac in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U is the only character to have battle damage as he racks up more and more percent. In fact, the exact percent in which he gets battle damage on his face is 100%. And in training mode, you have full control over the speed as well as how much percent you give any given character. So it can be really fun to just switch between 99% and 100% to see that battle damage appear and disappear at will. Due to the character being included in Smash Bros. Well before his appearance in the Pokemon franchise would be released to the public, there are subtle differences between the colors and hues of Greninja between his appearance in Super Smash Bros. 4 and his official artwork in Pokemon games. It's especially noticeable on his webbing as well as the bubbles on his limbs. In Smash 4, it seems that Palutena's shield was a lot of trouble for the developers. One of the big problems being that if you hold an item, you can see that the shield detaches from her arm for some reason. Pac-Man's a character with a lot of cool trivia behind him, but one thing I will say is that in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, he is the only non-customizable character that smiles as he's drowning. Whether he's struggling or has the final drowning animation, he holds a smile at all times, which no other character seems to have that attribute to them. For Robin in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, if you hold right on the D-pad, you'll get the specific victory animation for Robin and Chrom, but you'll see that Chrom doesn't have a looping idle animation. He can only blink, and so next to Robin, who's clearly breathing during this animation, Chrom remains completely still. In Super Smash Bros. Wii U and Ultimate, there's a lot to be commended for the fact that they use the Monado arts as part of his moveset. In fact, it's pretty awesome that most of the Monado arts are actually from the game Xenoblade. However, 2 of the Monado arts are not actually from Xenoblade, that being Smash and Jump. It makes sense. Those are 2 elements that are very important to Smash Brothers, but literally no importance to Xenoblade's combat. For Bowser Jr. and the Koopalings, one fun little piece of trivia is that in the Everyone Is Here trailer, you'll see that Lemmy is doing his taunt, and during his taunt, his face disappears in that trailer.
Duck Hunt Duo!
For Duck Hunt Dog, outside of mentioning the fact that they should have kept the NES sound effect for the laugh, one of the weird things about Super Smash Bros. For Wii U is that any character with a special grab that grabs Duck Hunt will find that the duck gets in a T-pose during that animation. Ryu in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is a really weird situation where his art style doesn't seem to match any of his appearances in any of his games. The closest distinction that seems to be where he's supposed to be derived from is Street Fighter V, because his hair is a little bit spikier than it was in past games, and it sort of matches up here. But the other features to his face don't seem to match up with Street Fighter V. In Ultimate, his chin is very sharp, his cheeks are really sunken in, everything's kinda different. And so what we have here in Ultimate is a Ryu that just simply doesn't exist. Now figuring out which Ken they use for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is really easy. His eyes are blue, therefore it nails it right down to Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter X Tekken. During this time, Street Fighter V was out and Ken's eyes were brown again, something that the series held onto for many, many years, only to be changed back in Street Fighter 6, which hadn't come out at the time of Smash Ultimate's release. How Ken ended up with blue eyes if Street Fighter V was already out probably comes down to the fact that his character design was radically altered for Street Fighter V initially, although you could get the OG costumes in that game, and so possibly as a discussion between Sakurai and the folks at Capcom, the 2 parties probably just defaulted to whatever was the last game to have Ken in his iconic red gi. Now here's the other inspiration for this entire video, Cloud. One of the things I've always wanted to share with people is this little detail that I noticed is that Cloud's boots on the second available color for his original costume are brown. Now, why is this significant at all? Well, the big reason why it's significant is because, first of all, it's the only color that makes them brown, and secondly, this is a reference to the original boots that Cloud used to wear in Final Fantasy VII. After the original game, his boots have been constantly retconned to black and never changed since. And with all the evidence that seems to suggest that Square Enix is a little bit difficult to work with, I mean, the fact that Cloud's voice is still Japanese even in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate says a lot. It's really, really surprising that Smash Bros. Managed to get away with giving Cloud brown boots. But you better believe that anytime I pick Cloud, that's the color I go with for sure. Love me some classic Cloud. For Corrin in Super Smash Bros. For Wii U, there is a glitch in both of the characters where if you launch them really far into the sky, they don't make any sort of grunts or anything like that. The audio for it is in the sound test, so it was supposed to be in the game. However, it just was never properly implemented. This was fixed, however, for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, so you can hear that here, how it was supposed to sound. There's a really weird quirk to Bayonetta in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. For whatever reason, in the no contest or the victory screen or whatever, they make the character model for Bayonetta taller than she is in-game. And so characters that are very easy to do a size comparison with, like Bowser for example here, if you stand her next to Bowser in-game and then switch over to the no contest screen, you can see that she just towers over Bowser. If you think that I'm just cherry picking, here's another example with Sephiroth. In the playing field, Sephiroth has a head over hers, and in the no contest screen, she has about an eye level just above Sephiroth's. Inkling's lore inconsistency in Super Smash Bros. Is that the Inkling can swim. Now this is something that's not possible in the game Splatoon. If an Inkling touches water, it dissolves. But obviously, that would make it the only character in Super Smash Bros. That can't swim. So as a compromise to the lore, while also keeping Inkling competitive with the other characters, Inkling does receive damage while in water, and no matter which state the Inkling is in while in the water, it'll always look like it's drowning. At a glance, it looks like Ridley is just a faithful recreation of his Super Metroid version, but that couldn't be any further from the case. This model from Super Smash Bros. Ultimate is an amalgamation of many different things that come from many different versions of Ridley. To start with, the snout was the hardest thing to pin down, but it seems that the elevated tip of his snout comes from Metroid Prime 3, but it also possibly came from the Metroid 2 remake on 3DS. The spikes on the side of his face, as well as the design pattern on his wings, are possibly from Metroid Other M. That wing pattern could also come from Metroid Zero Mission. The elongatedness, as well as the scale-like pattern that goes across the back of his head, is definitely a reference to the Metroid Other M model. The color composition is likely derived from the Super Metroid version of Ridley, and the exposed rib cage and slenderness of the arms is more likely derived from the box art of Super Metroid. For Simon Belmont, there's a unique piece of dialogue tied to his victory screen that can be really easy to miss because its original voice dialogue says, "I vanquished the darkness."
Simon,
I vanquished the darkness!
But if he defeats a character that he deems is part of the darkness, he will then change his dialogue to darkness.
game. Simon, win.
The darkness!
These characters that he'll do this with is Dark Pit, Dark Samus, Ridley, Ganondorf, and Bayonetta. For Richter, while he's sleeping, he has a voice dialogue that says Dracula. However, in-game, when you put him to sleep, you can't hear it because the voice audio clip loops before it gets a chance to say Dracula. So sadly, the only way you can hear this is in the sound settings.
Dracula.
For King K. Rool, if you do his side taunt and then pause the game and then look at him from this angle, you can see that there's a tear in his character model. For Isabelle, when you capture people in a net, you can pause the game and you can actually move the camera inside the net to see what's going on. For many characters, they size down the limbs and the head just so none of it clips through the netting. And Bowser's one of the best examples of how they don't cull out the geometry. It's just shrunken down, because if you move the camera as close as you possibly can and then use the Switch's zoom-in feature, you can see Bowser's tiny head in full view. For Incineroar, there's a unique championship belt that he has in one of his victory screens, and this belt is exclusive to Super Smash Bros. It's not featured anywhere else, and on it you can see a crown.
Piranha Plant.
For Piranha Plant, his character model is based off a very specific Piranha Plant, which is the one from Mario Party 3. This is evidenced not just by the fact that it's a potted plant, but also that there's some gap at the bottom of the pot as well. For Joker, he's the only character in Super Smash Bros. History whose profile picture changes in mid-battle. That is, of course, unless they change into a character of a different name. For Hero, they are yet again another character who has dialogue in Japanese, but is replaced by grunts for other regions. Here in the reveal trailer for the Japanese version, you can hear some of the phrases that he says. For Banjo-Kazooie, there is a unique voice clip used for when Banjo loses in stamina mode. I've went ahead and just removed the music and sound effects so you can hear it as clearly as possible.
Go! Game!
Terry Bogard also has something really interesting going on with stamina mode. When he loses, his hat flies off his head, similar to his past games. Byleth continues the tradition that every Super Smash Bros. Game that has had paid DLC has had a Fire Emblem character in the base roster and a Fire Emblem character as paid DLC. Although it's been explained that any character from ARMS could technically be the main character, it's still pretty definitive to say that Spring Man and Ribbon Girl are probably the two main characters of the franchise. I mean, they were right on the front of the box and also in all the early promotional material. So Min-Min really does kind of act as the first character to represent a new first-party franchise from Nintendo and start off the roster of Smash Bros. As a side character. Steve from Minecraft is a really interesting case where the victory screen for Steve has him eating some meat and then holding it, which that swiftly got a patch removing it from Nintendo. One can only speculate as to why Nintendo chose to do this, but I will tell you that I do remember a lot of people having a lot to say about this victory screen when the character finally released. For Sephiroth, his victory screen loads much faster than the other characters. This is due to the fact that the fiery background is pre-rendered instead of a 3D modeled setting like most characters have. For Pyra and Mythra, there was a couple of huge changes made to the character model for very obvious reasons. Starting with Pyra, she has see-through nylon in areas where there's a lot of exposed skin, and Mythra seems to have black spandex on her legs, her back, and also a cover-up on the front of the model as well. For Kazuya, his crowd cheer is the only crowd cheer in the entire game that has an instrument that plays during it, which is a drum. For Sora's reveal trailer, there's a difference between the US version and the Japanese version. The lip syncing when he shows his face on screen is different between the two versions at this point in the video. As far as the Miis go, I'll only talk about one of the Miis. For the Mii Sword Fighter, his sword changed from Smash 4 to Smash Ultimate. However, when Kirby sucks him up and takes his power, the default sword from Smash 4 is still the sword that Kirby uses. And that's all I got for now. Thank you so much to Bloops for making the intro to this video. It was fantastic. Also, huge thank you to SuperSmashBrothersWiki.com for having a lot of great trivia pieces that made this video expedited quite a bit. And with that, thanks for watching. Take care.